Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I am British, so we will be starting on time, which is now. Thank you all for being so punctual. We're delighted to host this panel today. My name is Alice MacDonald, and I'm the director of the Hungry for Action campaign, which is a global civil society campaign made up of over 40 organizations. And we are part of the SDG2 Advocacy Hub, which exists to bring an end to hunger. We're delighted to be co-hosting this with World Vision International and to be here at the FAO. And delighted to have such esteemed panelists, including the chair of the Committee on Food Security. I kind of wish we didn't have to host this panel today, but as we all know, 783 million people are hungry right now, more than the entire population of the European Union and the United States combined. 3 billion people can't afford a healthy diet in all of our countries, I imagine, some of them live, and 45 million children are severely malnourished. And as we see so starkly in parts of Gaza, Sudan, Haiti, people are on the brink of famine. And it really shouldn't be like this. We know there is enough food for everyone. So this is political. We can end it, we can save lives, build resilience, and secure the future. But I am hopeful, and we have big opportunities this year to try and break that cycle of crises. We've got the G7, we're all here today for the C7 summit, and we have the G20. And today's event is going to dive into actually what do we need to end the global food crisis? How can we use those events, the G7, the G20, and many more, Nutrition for Growth, to drive progress? And how do we as civil society work better together to push the dial on what we really need to see happen? So there's not loads of us, so I want to make this interactive. So what we'll do is start panel with some remarks from primarily political government representatives, then we'll move into more of a civil society discussion, and between them we will have questions and answers. So if anyone wants to be brave and come down to the main table, you are very welcome to, otherwise I will try and turn my head. So I'm really pleased to welcome Her Excellency Ambassador Nosipho Jizilei to be our keynote speaker, the chair of the Committee on World Food Security and many other roles, ambassador from South Africa as well. We're really grateful for you to be here today. So to kick us off, I wanted to invite you to give us your reflections on what we need to see from the G7 and the G20 this year. And the Committee on Food Security, as the recommendations from the working group reference, is the leading platform on this issue. So what role does the CFS play in these efforts as well? Over to you, Ambassador.
Well, thank you, Alice, for that inspirational reflection or introduction. I'm delighted to again have this opportunity to address this important grouping as the chairperson of the CFS, known to be the Committee on World Food Security. Especially at this critical juncture for our communities and our planet. Of course, you will not be able to achieve food security if we do not look after both the land, the atmosphere, and even our oceans and coastal system. Hunger and malnutrition in all of its forms are major challenges that all our communities, at least in the various regions, are facing. And it doesn't matter which region has the highest number. The fact is we seem to have hungry people across the globe. 1 in 3 people globally suffer from at least one form of malnutrition. And according to the 2023 State of the World Security and Nutrition Report, we observe that hunger is still on the rise, as well as the micronutrient deficiencies, overweight, obesity, and so forth. In addition, therefore, we do need to also put a spotlight in respect of healthy diets. And the question is whether healthy diets are affordable. It does seem that, again, this is an area where most vulnerable are also unable to afford healthy diets. And in the report, it's projected that more than 3 billion people are facing unaffordability in respect of healthy diets. And again, I think this being probably marking a turning point, the development gains that were made in recent decades are really under threat, both from the pandemic, but also the serious situation of wars and conflicts that's raging our continents, whether it's the Middle East, in Africa, and even here in Europe. And addressing these challenges requires urgent collective action to transform our food systems into sustainable food systems to ensure adequate nutrition and healthy diets for all, whilst providing jobs which are decent and incomes that are reasonable for family farmers and family producers. So I would say that one of the real important aspects in respect of all of us being involved in different activities is how do we converge and coordinate at best to get the best and maximum outcomes in this respect. And to achieve this, it is crucial for countries to develop policies and institutional reforms that take into account all relevant actors and sectors in the various countries. And civil society organizations are crucial in amplifying the voices of the most vulnerable and dispossessed communities. Therefore, I think in other cultures where I come from, we do say that civil society is the watchdog for citizens in certain instances, because governments, as much as governments are entrusted with the responsibility to take care of the citizens, at the same time, it helps to have civil society that keeps reminding and knocking at the doors of the governments to make sure that we do the right thing and we take the correct decisions that are demanded in respect of the current circumstances. In this regard, again, the Committee on World Food Security stands ready to provide its policy platforms and the legitimate platform and space for debate on food security and nutrition issues. It serves as the UN Global Food Governance Body, bringing together 141 member states. And again, we know that we have about 195 members in the UN, and therefore this is a critical mass in respect of governments and civil society representatives through the civil society mechanism, as well as the private sector mechanism and other relevant stakeholders, if they are not part of that mechanism, are enabled to participate in CFS policies in the advisory committee or advisory body that has been set up. And we keep on reviewing the participation even in that respect. So there is no limit to participation. We have to make sure that we do undertake these informed consultation processes with stakeholders to promote convergence on global policies to address the systemic and crucial causes of hunger and malnutrition, and to support country-led efforts. And again, this is one of the mandates of CFS, to provide advice and support to countries and regions in this respect. And over the years, CFS has negotiated and endorsed policy products that can guide decision makers at regional and national or local levels in designing programs that are responsive both in terms of investments for sustainable food systems. The civil society mechanism has been actively involved in these discussions to ensure that their voices and their needs are reflected in the policy products agreed by the CFS. And in the current form of other multilateral institutions, whether it's G20, G7, G20 under the presidency of Brazil already has got a clear program that is seeking to address hunger and poverty, and those efforts should be enhanced, and we should all be participants to make sure that there's still convergence so that we avoid duplication and address the real causes and of poverty and malnutrition. We are convinced that working with the leaders of this group will provide an opportunity as C7 yourselves, an opportunity to support and develop targeted solutions as you propose as the C7 working group on food sovereignty and food systems transformation. So we look forward to get to reflect on some of those recommendations that are being put forward and to sharpen the areas that are going to design real implementation so that we are able to see action and less talking, more action and results that are required to really achieve change. And I've been invited as a CFS chairperson to participate in the G20 task force as led by Brazil under the presidency in terms of G20. And that in my role, I would also ensure that I contribute the value that already member states in having conversed at the global level on some of the policies that would therefore be the base of the toolkit that could be utilized to facilitate implementation by those countries that would like to participate and implement. And therefore, I also wish to extend an invitation to all of you as civil society representatives to actively participate in the upcoming CFS 52 plenary in October that will be held in Rome. And I think, is it the 21st? I can't remember now the dates, towards the end of October. It will be a landmark event marking the 50th anniversary of the CFS, as well as the guidelines on voluntary guidelines on realization of the right to food, which is one of the key pillars of the policies that are developed because we always have to bear in mind that food is a right. Even if the guidelines are voluntary, they are voluntary in nature to enable that member states and participants are able to utilize them to meet the requirements at a local level. So it's not like you can choose not to actually heed the call on human rights. It's not an option at all. So I call on the leadership of the G7 and G20 to further strengthen their focus on promoting coordination and policy convergence among all relevant actors, including through dialogues such as the one that you celebrate today with the C7, as it is in our collective fight against hunger and malnutrition. And therefore, the Committee on World Food Security is eager to collaborate on these initiatives and provide a platform for both showcasing progress and fostering discussions to drive meaningful changes for the future. So I thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Some important points we'll come back to: convergence, coherence, and action, not words. Although we're going to have some words today. It's delighted our next two speakers are from member states of the G20 and the G7. So I'm going to turn first to Vicente Bezerra, who's the alternate representative of Brazil to FAO, WFP, and IFAD. As we know, G20 is hosted by Brazil. You said you will establish a global alliance against hunger. Can you tell us more about the ambition this year of the G20, the alliance, how it works with the G7, and how civil society can engage with the G20?
Thank you, Alice. It's a pleasure to see you again, and thank you for leading this process. It's a very timely conversation and a very important one. I also thank the Ambassador Nozifo Jazili for setting so well the context in which we are and the challenges we have in front of us. You definitely make my life much easier as a speaker now, because I think I'll be able to make all my comments within the time limit that was suggested to me. So the ambition, I think no one could formulate the ambition better than President Lula himself when he took over the G20 presidency and the summit in India December last year. He announced that the Brazilian priority as in the chair of the G20 would be to reduce the reduction of inequalities, focusing on social inclusion and the fight against hunger and poverty. That may not sound that ambitious, but it is if we take a look on the numbers that you just mentioned and the difficulties we're facing to get back on track to the achievement of the SDG 1 and 2. Yeah. Less than 10 years ago, we adopted the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. And in its first paragraph, we stated that poverty eradication is the greatest global challenge and an indispensable requirement for sustainable development. However, the numbers we heard today and which we've been following in the past years show that the trends are not following that goal. Progress has stalled in many of the SDGs, especially 1 and 2. And we are even setting back on some targets in some regions of the world. So maybe the ambition is to reverse the trend. And that's why Brazil, as the chair of G20, proposed the Global Alliance Against Poverty and Hunger and put forward the task force. So the task force for the establishment of the alliance brought together the 2 tracks of the G20, the Sherpa track and the finance tracks, working to achieve better alignment in terms of policy implementation. But more than that, we invited to the presidency invited to take part in the task force several other countries, organizations and initiatives. The African Union, for the first time, has been part of the G20. The CFS, as Ambassador Nozifo mentioned earlier today, the RBAs are participating. In the end, in the meeting we had in March in Brazil, we have 53 delegations to the task force. But we're even going beyond that in the sense of trying to make it as inclusive as possible. We hold consultations with civil society, and we're also taking into the inputs from the civil society mechanism of the CFS through the G20 processes. We will comment further on that, but I would like to focus now on what is the alliance and its characteristics. So not only to talk about ambition, but how can we get to where we want? The idea of being inclusive in the process is because the alliance should be open and voluntary, and therefore we need to mobilize support for its success. We are not suggesting proposing any new forum for policy debate or any new fund or any new organization. We're trying to make the existing mechanisms to work better and with more focus on action, on implementation. And how is that? Basically, the alliance will have 3 pillars. The national pillar, whose focus is to promote national commitments, focusing on the implementation of recognized policies to fight poverty and hunger. The financial pillar to mobilize resources from global and regional funds, development agencies, public and private donors, innovative financial mechanisms. And the knowledge pillar, which is to mobilize international cooperation, technical assistance, and sharing of expertise. Those 3 pillars, first, they would work in a way that to enable countries to implement the policy which is best fitted to achieve those goals. No one-size-fits-all solution here, since it's coming from a commitment from the country that will implement the policy. And second, the 3 pillars would work, the working of the 3 pillars would converge to the implementation of a basket of policies. This basket of policies comprise, I can mention some obvious examples like conditional cash transfers, school meals associated with family farming support, and other social policy mechanisms that are adopted elsewhere that have been proven to be effective and have shown the results. So we can mobilize that expertise and counting on the financial support from existing sources to allow countries to actually implement those policies and try to move forward on SDG 1 and 2. So regarding the coordination about existing initiatives, especially between the G7 and G20 presidency, I'm actually coming from the G7 working group on food security, which is a testimony of the coordination, and the initiative that they are putting forward within the G7 actually converge and try to build synergies with the proposed Global Alliance Against Poverty and Hunger. We, not only as a group, but also individually, we are counting with the support of the G7 members that are also part of the G20 to move forward with the alliance. Regarding the civil society organizations engagement, I think it's a critical point. As I mentioned before, I would say that civil society is already participating in the process through the 2 channels that I mentioned, the direct consultations that were led by the co-chairs, my colleagues Saulo and Renato, and also the CFS civil society mechanism, very active and important. And you were already invited to participate in the CFS meeting in October, which will be very important because it will be 1 month before the G20 summit, in which we hope to have adopted a very ambitious global alliance against poverty and hunger. And furthermore, I will say that the participation does not end there at the global processes. At the national level, we are in a moment of raising awareness on the importance of these initiatives and bring back these issues to the top of the international agenda. So I'm truly confident on the capacity of the civil society to contribute to this process, as I mentioned, not only at the international forum, but also at local, national and regional level debates that you actually participate. And finally, looking forward, we also see civil societies as part of the design of the alliance to move forward for the implementation and the monitoring of the results that we expect and we need to achieve. So those would be my comments, and I look forward to further discuss those issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vicente. And it has been a lot of dialogue and conversation already, which is a brilliant sign, I think, of what's to come. We're delighted we've got a last-minute addition. You haven't got a sign, but we're delighted to have Latina Kone, who is the advisor to the permanent representative from the Embassy of France. And France is obviously a key G7 country. You'll be hosting Nutrition for Growth in 2025. So please, could you tell us what France wants to see from the G7 this year, and given your leadership of Nutrition for Growth and into 2026 of the G7, how can France carry on the important agenda that we're talking about today?
Thank you very much for the floor and having me here. For those of you who know Victoire, I'm covering for her. She's from the bilateral embassy. I work for the UN embassy here in Rome. And it's a pleasure to be with you. I think you said it all, Madam Ambassador Vicente. The whole purpose of us being here is to make things move forward. I'm not going to bombard you with figures or very clever ideas that I would have come up on my own with. What has changed between the first N4G and now? In 2012, 2013, on the first edition of N4G, we didn't have a common agenda. The SDG was not yet approved at UN level. The fight against hunger was somehow perceived as a niche, and I don't think it is anymore. We had limited means, and we didn't have the capacity to work together, because the mere fact that you're standing in this room listening to me, not blaming me for world hunger, is a show that both governments and CSOs grew together, and now they talk more, which is a positive step forward, because it means that we can look for common solutions and common ground. So that's really important. I'm looking backwards a little bit, but that's an important statement to make. Second idea, what has changed also is that we engaged together in this fight, especially on SDG 2 against hunger. And we kind of realized that there was not a one-size-fits-all solution. There was no definitive move forward. So you can always go backward even if you've made some progresses. I think the period since 2018 and even 2020 has shown that malnutrition is progressing again in certain areas, and it's more and more difficult to fight against hunger. This is partly due to man-made problems, conflict being the #1 driver, but also climate change, social inequalities. And I would say that we are nowhere near to a donor's fatigue, but the accumulation of crises, the difficulty to find concrete solutions and mobilize again and again and again has kind of put us in some sort of a trap. So I'm not going to make promises today. I'm not going to say N4G in Paris will be the one solution to all of our problems. It's an ongoing fight that we need all to share in. You can't solve world hunger and malnutrition with one summit, one meeting. You have to continue the conversation, and that's why the CFS work and the G20 initiative launched by Brazil, as well as the G7 Italian presidency, are welcome. So what I want you to take back is that the way France sees things is that it's good that we talk about it. It's only a little more than 5 years before the end of the 2030 agenda. So now is the time for action. There is not enough resources for us to afford duplication. I think you mentioned duplication, and that's very much the spirit of how N4G in Paris will be organized. So on end of March next year, the N4G summit will take place in Paris. That's the tradition. It's also linked to the Olympics. Before that, we want to organize an open participatory process where everybody will have their stand, but also we need to break the silos, I would say. Maybe that's the one thing we need to change. It's good to have existing bodies and ongoing conversations. We need to organize things a little bit differently. And that's what you probably heard, that we want it to be a bit political. When we say political, we mean breaking the silos and making things happen. So there will be 6 participatory working groups en route to N4G in Paris. One will focus on gender and nutrition, creating bridges, climate and food systems, health and social protection, crisis resilience, but also, and that's, I think, important, data and artificial intelligence and innovation. Because as I was mentioning, we need to build bridges between areas that do not naturally come to mind as combined solutions to fight against hunger. So that's the spirit of it. And I think I'm still on time, but I will try to conclude and say the aim of N4G is to make sure that the nutrition pillar of all development policies remains coherent and central. So you can count on France's involvement in and let's say convening power and diplomatic ways to push for that ambition to continue. What we need now from you, CSOs, but also other diplomatic partners, is a joint engagement. There's no, once again, there's not one solution to this big problem. It's a collection of initiatives that we need. So we'll of course try to bring on board the private sector, philanthropists, NGOs. That's why you're here and why I'm here, and new innovative actors. I think that's in a nutshell what I wanted to say.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We're going to all be very busy for at least the next 2 years. I'm really delighted now to go over to Moussa Sowe, who is the co-chair. I'm getting your bio up because you've got lots of roles. The coordinator of the Civil 7 Food Sovereignty and Food Systems Transformation Working Group with Italo Rizzo over here, who we heard from earlier in the plenary. And you're also the president of the National Coordinating Organization for Farmers Associations in Gambia. So on the front lines, really, of what what we're talking about. So I wanted to kind of get your reactions to what you've heard today from the politicians and governments, and how does it kind of match up with what the C7 set out? What do you want to see this year? And are you optimistic that civil society is going to see some of the things that we're fighting for come forward? Over to you.
Thank you very much. I must also, first of all, thank Ambassador. I'm very, very close to her, and I can disclose that here. Honestly, before I get into the issues, there's the G7 and the G20. Let me bring these three issues to you. First of all, there is a seed genetic colonization. Secondly, there is a organism genocide. When I say organism genocide, what I mean is our natural environment is being toxic pesticides are really killing our environment. So there are human genocide, but there is also mechanism genocide going on right now. And the other aspect is the fact that there is land grabbing everywhere. So then it means the smallholder farmer is being coup d'etat. It's French, right? You're French. So these three categories of actions are really keeping us, down, because we need to have our traditional seeds, our identity, our sense of purpose is what we use and look at and we feel happy. It's really been gradually taking off. Thank you very much. Sorry, I was just bringing these three key issues before the G7 and also the G20. However, let me first acknowledge the working group on food justice and food system transformation. I have my coordinator, Italo, is just behind. Italo, if you can raise your hand, let them see you, and also have some of my colleagues. Generally, it was an inclusive participatory from all the members of the working group. And we also came up with very critical discussed points we feel are very, very important. First of all, I've mentioned the organism genocide. We look at the biodiversity, of course, and also the water consumption. Because of the organism genocide, most of our water is being polluted. So it means it ends up in the rivers and people health also challenge. Climate change, pollution of the soil, human health, and also crisis is not only one of the availability of the cost of food insecurity, but also because there is no equal and also equitable access to both physical and economical. Because when you talk about food, it's one way of producing it. It's also one way of also being able to have access, affordability. So the critical points we looked at is on the governance, for example, decision making on food is this passed across various forum or fora. Voice of the most affected is disregarded. It means when it comes to decision making, basically the voices of the voiceless are never on the table where decisions are passed. People assume that they could plait our hairs in our absence. I think if you want to plait my hair, basically have to see me sit with you on the same table. So on the governance, concentration of corporate power due to inadequate regulations by government and treating food as a commodity rather than human rights, already mentioned by the chair of the CFS. Food is a birthright. I'm not sure if we should negotiate to have access to food. And the third one under governance, the use of food as a weapon of war must be banned, meaning that we cannot accept what is happening. Crises are everywhere, but I think as humans, we should have the opportunity to have food that is safe, nutritious, and if possible, affordable. On the agroecology transition and just food system, the working group recommended that farmers' right to their own seeds undermined by some policies. I've mentioned it here. There is a seed genetic colonization. And this, I think we cannot accept this. Access to land, obstructed by land grabbing and unfavorable land policies, especially for women and youth. Women are known to be producing most of the food we eat, but they continue to negotiate to have access to land. I don't think that can really help this world. The other aspect under the agroecology transition, inadequate resources for small-scale producers, failure of many states to respect the Malabo commitment. Our countries, our heads of states have committed to protocols and agreements of 10% of the national or the public budget should go to agriculture, and that has not really been happening. Corporate control industry farming relies on subsidies and technology that hinder transition to sustainable agriculture. Yes, we are saying that if you look at the situation in Africa, you cannot promote technology to replace what humans are doing. What we are saying is we need to have a system that we know we appreciate as smallholder and small-scale producers. But in fact, the best among us is the person who joins the beliefs that the farmers have and help them to improve instead of bringing new technology systems that really hinders sustainable food production. On the food crisis, underlying causes of food crisis are structural and systematic, linked to conflict, climate crisis, poverty, and inequalities. We know very well that the climate change, it's a very big challenge, particularly for Africa. People are faced with climate change. They barely have no contribution on and the fact that it decides what our policies would look like, what the farmers would really have to be doing to improve on their life and livelihood. I think climate change coupled with other challenges is becoming a very, very big problem on the access to food for people. Inadequate funding to address food crisis, we mentioned the Malabo commitment. Governments, particularly in Africa, I'm sure to say this, we don't have only depend on funding from partners, but rather we should start home and we should start with our national budgets and commit more of the national budget to food production. Under the recommendation for the C7 on the food justice and food system transformation, we recommended that support democratic policy decision-making rooted in a human rights framework. We have the UNDROP and the UNDRIP, which we know about. These are international instruments that have clearly mentioned that there is need to look at it with the lens of human rights. Under that recommendation, recognize and support the CFS with the CSIPM and the HLLP. Let me again say that the CSIPM that I have really supported over the years has been a very critical partner of the CFS and is the only international instrument where we all see each other as equal partners. Consultations, ideas, whatever really comes to that. I think there is need to seriously protect the CFS if really we want to continue to see that neutral environment where everybody feels to be at home is the CFS. Under that recommendation, uphold existing international frameworks agreed by parties. That is the UNDROP, the UNDRIP, the Decade of Family Farming, where you can see that cooperation among the different actors. I think there's need to really look at that very well. On the recommendation 2, the direct trade agreement, market regulations, and investment towards supporting food justice. On that one, we have the first bullet point, promote the transparency in agricultural market, support the introduction of market regulations to ensure fair prices for small-scale producers and healthy diet at accessible price for consumers, allow policy space for low-income food deficits countries to promote and protect local food production. I continue telling people, food is all around what you are cultured in. What the food that you accept is the food that gives you a sense of purpose. It's food that gives you an identity. And that's the locally, food that we produce basically is what really we are recommending. Under that same agreement, ban investment promoting industrialized agriculture that impede people's access to land, water, and seeds. These are our three identities. Is the seeds, is the land, and is the water. I told you initially there is seed genetic colonization. There is the small holder is being pushed away from his or her land. And there is also organism genocide. We have human genocide, but we also have organisms, whether we know it or not. So under the third recommendation, ensure policy coherence for development. Ensure that the G7 countries, policies and parties do not harm the food security of partners countries. We're saying that we need to see each other as partners. We need to see each other as colleagues. We also need to respect the views and aspirations of the different people from the different countries. Under the same recommendation, take the lead in canceling debt, especially for Africa. Africa is struggling to feed its people because the debt that they're involved in are commitments they cannot take away from Africa. And I think the G7 and the G8, for the fact that you are called the G7 and G8 shows that you are stronger. Please consider canceling those debts for Africa. And under the same recommendation is support the binding treaties on business and human rights and verify that all investment comply with environmental and human rights standards. We can produce, but while we protect the environment, that's what we're calling for. Let's produce, but the environment should be protected. So under the next recommendation, sustain the agroecology transition to resilient territorial food system. Under that same recommendation, strengthen policies and change the subsidiary system to support agroecological transition and role of farmers in managing the rural environment and biodiversity to protect land's rights. It is so beautiful to see around. You see the butterflies, you see the bees, you see the other organisms. I mean, they are part of us, they're part of this world. Why do we want to kill them? And it's all because of toxic pesticides. Why do we have to kill ourselves? Let's remember that the skin of the earth is the soil, and it has to be healed. And it can only be healed when we promote agroecology, natural way of farming. The soil is crying because it's been poisoned by toxic pesticides. I think we need to look at what agroecology offers. Natural farming, what is more beautiful more than that? Go out here and look at the environment. You can't even see bees anymore and butterflies. And they were known to really support our pollination. And the other recommendation is support for gender justice. We should all be equal. We should all see each other as partners, as colleagues. We should plan together, execute together, monitor together. That's what we want. So there is no need of discrimination. And under that recommendation, support policies to transform social norms and structural barriers to women agencies. Number two is increase investment that enhance the role of women, support women knowledge, skills, and ability, and support economic development. Under the next recommendation is the prevention of food crisis.
Musa, we're going to have to move on to the next
Yeah,
book in a
I
minute,
have
just to
just
wrap
1
up.
minute.
Okay.
Another one, strengthen evidence-based and invest in anticipatory financing accessible to local actors. The last one is the allocate and operationalize adequate resources for food crisis. Scale of life living, saving exercises. Make ambitious commitment at 2025 Nutrition for Growth Summit in France. Commit towards a multi-sectoral approach. Promote a global plan that enhances accountability, coordination in responding to the food crisis, recognizing the centrality of the CFS. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Musa. There's very comprehensive recommendations, so please everyone check them out. I'm going to see if there's one quick question, burning question from the audience for any of our panelists. Because I know some of you need to go back to the G7 meeting before we go to our second lot. Okay, then I've got one quick question for all of you as we finish. I think in kind of 2 sentences, let me just find my question. If we got to the end of this year with the G20 completed, the G7 completed, we've had the important CFS meeting, what is the one thing that would make you think that's been a successful year for this agenda? I don't know who wants to start. Shall I go to you, Ambassador?
Well, if we come out end of the year having one plan converging in specific areas. One plan, one policy, yeah, I can say a plan grounded in a policy that converges in one area, one site, in a country or in a region, together.
Perfect. That is the #1 ask of the Hungry for Action campaign. So I'm going to put that as an advocacy success. Vicente, can I go to you? You know, you've had the G20 summit in November. You're probably exhausted. What's going to make you think, wow, that was really successful. That was worth it?
I think the Global Alliance Against Poverty and Hunger can be a game changer in many contexts. I think this is a deliverable. It's within reach. It's an ongoing process. In March, we agreed in the criteria for the policy basket. Next week, we're going to have an important meeting of the task force in Teresina to agree on the other documents, the inception document, as we call it, which is the birth certificate of the Global Alliance, to say so, the governance structure, the statement of commitments. And I think that from there to November, the important is to mobilize support from all private and public and civil society and all actors that are really willing to engage and mobilize the resources they have available to support the implementation and to change lives of people that are badly in need. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I think it is a brilliant initiative, the Global Alliance, and we're going to do everything we can to support it. Lassina, can I go to you for your, what does success look like for France or for you at the end of this year?
At the end of this year, the N4G summit will not have taken place. So my answer is really easy. If by that time you guys come up with good plans, we put them on the table in Paris and we move forward. We have 5 years.
And just to put you on the spot, and also probably some wins at the Olympics, because that's the other big event in Paris this year. If it's 18 months on and Nutrition for Growth has happened, you know, we've had quite a few Nutrition for Growth so far. What do you think would make this one kind of stand out and really be remembered?
Quality over quantity, I would say, because the funding outlook, I cannot make any promise. I won't. But then if we can find innovative ways to mobilize, to work together, to go knock at new doors, not just government doors, not just G7, G20, more than this, private sector, everybody has a role to play. I think that's really the spirit that we want to bring in Paris next year.
Thank you very much. And Musa, you had some very powerful words, like phrases I haven't heard before, but I think bring what we're talking about to life. There's a lot of demand within all very important. What's the kind of one thing or one, you know, achievement you'd like to see by the end of this year?
Breaking the cycle of food crisis and transforming the food system in a more sustainable way to deliver for the people on the planet.
Point to one policy. We've got the policy baskets for the G20. Is there one specific, you know, or top policy you would say farmers or, you know, the money, anything you'd pull out from that list?
To be considered as partners, farmers should be considered as partners and not at the dead end of the road. We also have ideas we can contribute. Please give us the opportunity and let's share the table together. And then we think the best is we need to create an opportunity to create a synergy between local knowledge and science. Thank you.
Perfect. Equality of voice, really important. We're gonna say thank you to our first panelists. I know some of you have to go. I know, Musa, you're saying, but it is the C7 working group. So can I just have a final round of applause for our first panelists? Thank you. Thank you very much for your time. It's really appreciated. Yeah, we'll come to you. Great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to move on to our next section. We have got a little film, but we're probably going to show it at the end, I think, just for time to make sure we've got. So we've got a really great panel of civil society voices to come up next, all with different perspectives. Just let everyone go out. We've lost one of our panelists. Oh, actually, we're going to do the film a bit later. So, yeah. So I'll introduce our panelists first. We have Silvia Gisson from Save the Children Italy. We have got Lucia Esipila from Caritas Africa, Andrea Galante from World Vision, Alberta Guerra, who is the CSO liaison with GASPS, Stephen Ravuga, who is from a Tanzanian farming organization. I think I've got everybody there. So, sorry, I've just got to find my notes. This is the trouble with lots of bits of paper. So Lucy, I'm going to start with you. Caritas Africa has a very big presence. You do lots of work on resilience building with lots of organizations. What would you like to see on that agenda? You know, we've talked about the climate crises affecting lots of people, including those who didn't really contribute to it. What on the resilience building agenda would success look like from the G7 and the G20 this year?
Thank you, Alice. I was particularly impressed by the comment by the ambassador when she asked, are healthy diets affordable? And I think I have a solution. So I think the first thing that the G7 may do is to ensure that we channel financing towards agroecology. I saw Musa was telling me just before we started that there was this fertilizer summit in Kenya, and I was asking him, was there any hope? And he says there's still no hope because there's a challenge with the kind of soils that we have, and we're using these harmful fertilizers, these harmful pesticides, and they have an impact on our food safety. And there's a need for us to reflect on the current model of development and these issues of the neoliberal policies, capitalism, looking at profits at the expense of the lives of human beings, at the expense of the animal health, at the expense of the environment. So how do we channel financing towards agroecology so that we have healthy soils and see how to upscale it and to ensure that the food that is available, it is easily accessible for the farmers and can be utilized in terms of looking at the nutrition, the healthy diets, and that we have surplus. And when we have surplus, there's a need for us to reflect about value addition so that if there's we can address the aspects of food loss and food waste, and we can look at the dimensions of agroecology, the 13 principles, and how can we benefit from them, looking at the recycling and efficiency. And in that way, healthy diets will be affordable. And we can start by learning from lived experiences. I come from the perspective of faith communities as the Catholic Church. We are spread all over, and we can see that the work that we do with the communities, there are a lot of good things that are coming from there. Last week, I was sharing with a group of people on something that I've seen working in Malawi. Farmers are getting into contract farming just to address this issue of middlemen who distort the market, and they're able to buy things at a cheaper price from them, and then they sell at a higher price, and farmers are going at a loss. So how can we learn from lived experiences where things are working and communities are able to have their lives transformed from simple solutions, and how can we upscale this? Another thing is to address the trade imbalance. If you look within Africa, maybe traveling from Togo all the way to Lome, you will see that there's a group of farmers who are selling cocoa, beautiful chocolates over there. And you ask yourself, how will this make it to the large markets, here? And when you come to, maybe if you're in Brussels, you'll see the Belgian chocolate. And yet there are farmers from Côte d'Ivoire who are producing raw materials. So how do we address this trade imbalance in a way that where their raw materials, it's not dominated by multinational corporations, but also the local actors have a space that they can produce and that they can sell through fair price, and their lives can be transformed. So if we can see how to address the trade imbalance and take our time to learn from lived experiences and then channel financing towards agroecology, we can build resilience. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And really important to bring the stories through from what we're actually talking about. I'm going to go now to Andrea, who is Senior Policy Advisor for Food Security and Nutrition at World Vision International. So worked in this building for many years. You know, we've talked about the millions of children who go to bed hungry every night, and children are often the most vulnerable. And we've got to campaign on these issues. So what does civil society need to do to campaign more effectively on it? And can you talk about some of the initiatives that are planned already?
Okay, thank you. I still cannot believe that every night millions of children around the globe go to bed hungry, confronting the harsh reality of food insecurity. Among the most vulnerable to the impacts of this crisis are children. Okay, can you hear now? Yep. Okay. With specific nutritional needs that demand urgent attention. It is with this context the campaigning becomes absolutely critical. Campaigns play a pivotal role in raising awareness, mobilizing resources, influencing policy, and fostering collaboration. Initiatives like the Enough campaign, launched by World Vision in September 2023 at the UN General Assembly, exemplify this importance. This campaign aims to address child hunger and malnutrition on a global scale, with World Vision committing $3.54 billion over the next 3 years to reduce hunger and improve the nutritional status of 125 million children in 767 of the most affected countries. The urgency of the Enough campaign is critical, exacerbated by conflicts and climate change. Child hunger and malnutrition are at its worst level in generation, impacting millions of children's development, both physical and mentally. By working with partners and leverage our expertise, World Vision make these children visible, driving necessary changes in food assistance, school meals, health services, and other activities to eradicate child hunger and malnutrition. The Enough campaign brings the plight and the right of children to the major forum like the Community on World Food Security, G7, G20 summits, Nutrition for Growth. Such engagement is crucial to amplify the impact of our advocacy and ensure children's needs are central in the global policy making. As a child-focused agency, World Vision emphasized the importance of including children's voices in the decision-making process. Children are powerful change agents entitled to food and participation rights. We encourage all of you to include children's voice in developing, modifying, and implementing policies and activities. In conclusion, as we confront the global food crisis and this disproportionate impact on children, campaigning remains a vital tool in bringing their voice so high. With the necessary support and concerted effort, we can work together to ensure that every child has access to adequate food and nutritional care and the opportunity to thrive. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. And the 3.4 billion committed to by World Vision, it is pretty phenomenal when we don't see governments making many financial commitments, which we'll come back to in a bit. Can I turn now to you, Stephen Ruvuga, the Executive Director of Muviwata, a national farmers organization in Tanzania. I started this job about a year ago, and I have heard so many times the importance of smallholder farmers. But do you feel that is matched in reality? You're on the front lines as the chairman of a national farmers organization. What do you think G7 and G20 leaders need to do to safeguard the lives and livelihoods of farmers?
I think, first of all, I mean, as part of your response, let me introduce myself. Stephen, of course, from Tanzania, as you said, but I'm a son from a peasant's family. And actually, my parents were born from peasants' family, so we are a generation of peasants. So this question actually touches me personally. But also, to reflect on this question, if today you took coffee at your home or here, this is likely to have come from peasants, almost 90%, 95%. If you take chocolate, this could have come from definitely smallholder in Cote d'Ivoire, in Ghana, in wherever, but it should be smallholder. If you dress a nice shirt or dress from cotton, certainly this has come from peasants, no doubt about it. So here we talk of something that really touches our daily lives. And definitely it will be a very wrong approach to see that we can sideline peasants, we can sideline smallholder farmers. It's part of the equation, and it's an important part of the equation from just that introduction. But certainly, if you talk of smallholder farmers that are victims of policies, some are generated from G7. And of course, when you talk of smallholder farmers, country like in G20, Brazil, India, China, Indonesia, South Africa, themselves, they know who are peasants because they're the majority. So definitely we talk of the majority and we cannot sideline. So it is very, very important, for example, to see that they are part and parcel of the global food system. FAO has determined 70% of the food comes from the peasants. So you cannot actually sideline this. It is also important to know that between 70 to 80, and I don't care whether it is 60 point something, 0.9, but majority are smallholder farmers and part of the equation. So it's very important. We have seen a number of policies generated from here, which are actually affecting our lives. For example, when Europe decided to have alternative energy in form of biofuel, what did you do? What was done is to go to Africa, to go to Latin America, to go to Asia, actually evict people to get land for production of biofuel crops, which is very, very, very bad. When some countries need food production that they cannot produce here, the alternative is to go to Africa, Latin America, and Asia, displace people. And not only that, I'll touch on a small point that for recreation, for example, to have hunting blocks, I can tell you that the villagers surrounding the hunting areas are displaced, sometimes are killed to create for consumptive behavior of the rich. So this creates very unfair world, very, very unfair world. So, and I ask myself, how comes we know that in Europe, for example, there is a negotiation, I think there is approved EU Green Deal to reduce, use of pesticides, to reduce use of industrial fertilizers, to increase area of organic land. How comes the same things that you reduce here are dumped in Africa and elsewhere? This is the work of G7. Syngenta, Biosciences from Germany, and the likes. GMO, you regulate it here, but GMO is actually promoted in Africa. So I think there are so many policies. I don't talk about other past policies like structural adjustment programs, which have effects until today, 1980s, until today. Who are the architects? G7. United States holding the World Bank, France, Europe holding the IMF, together creating these very nasty policies that we are facing today. So I think it is it is very, very, very clear and very evident that we have some policies generated from here that actually are affecting our lives as peasants community in Africa. I subscribe to many that you already mentioned. I don't want to repeat, but this is, but talk of commitment. You know that there has been an agreement at UN level for developed countries to set aside at least 0.7% of GDP to support developing countries. You know that. So in the past 3 years, 2021, 2022, 2023, according to OECD report, only 5 countries, between 4 to 5 countries reached the target. Only one from G7. This is Germany. The rest are Nordic and others, Luxembourg. So that shows you the level of commitment. So we want to see this change, and in a way that we could have a fair world. We cannot achieve SDGs. You cannot achieve justice. We will continue to sing about hunger, malnutrition, undernutrition, year in, year out, if there is no commitment to solve that. Why? There is more rapid response to military, military demands, putting all the money in military, putting all the money in why not this? I have heard since I was a student at university about hunger and malnutrition. Hunger and malnutrition. I studied that in development studies, and today, 30 years later, I still talk about it here. We are talking too much, doing very little, almost nothing. And G7 is a global leader, has to do more to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Very powerful. We just have 2 more interventions and then open it up for questions. Alberta, you're the Civil Society Liaison Officer at the Global Agriculture and Food Security Programme, and that was launched by the G20 back in 2007, 2008, in response to the food crisis we had then. What do you think we can learn from the establishment of that mechanism to inform the G7 and G20? And to the first points about coherence, how does it all work together? Over to you.
So thank you, and thank you for the invitation. So just for those who are not very familiar with the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, which is commonly known as GASP, this is a multilateral funding mechanism. It's a platform that was established exactly in 2010 as an initiative by the G20 to support food security nutrition worldwide, and more and more and better investments in agriculture, sustainable agriculture, and food systems. So I will go straight to the lessons learned, because I know the time is short. So what do we have learned in the last 14 years? Well, first, GASP is still there, still alive, continues to operate. It went through a reform a few years ago in order to adapt itself to the renewed SDGs agenda. And what we have learned in all this journey? First, the importance of the grant mechanism. The GASP remains one of the few, if not the only one, operating with grants given to countries and other actors, in particular countries and organizations. So we'll come to this point later. So the rationale is that the GASP still believe that we cannot really give up with this mechanism. Many countries, as Musa was saying, are really stressed by that. In financial constraints, and not talk about after the COVID pandemic, what happened. So to have a mechanism that still provides grants to poorest countries is still very, very important. The other lessons that we learn is how it's important coordination to avoid the fragmentation. GASP is a platform where all major actors dealing with food security work together. So the UN food agencies, the donors, the recipient countries, also the civil society organizations, all are together. And of course, when defining the priorities to finance and when deciding the direction, it's important that all are together, discuss together. And when it comes to the grant decision making, it's very useful to see how grants are allocated in a way that tries to overcome coordination and fragmentation of public spending for agriculture. And we know that the financial landscape is highly fragmented with many initiatives. Anyone wants to have his flagship initiative. So through the GASP, there was this intention to resolve this fragmentation. For me, the most important lessons learned is how much inclusive governance support progress and the right way to do development. So in the GASP, we do have the invaluable contribution of civil society organizations in the steering committee, so in the decision making. They contribute to any GASP process and are active members of all the GASP processes and decision making, including the grant allocation decisions. Of course, as more or less in the CFS, the civil society do not have voting power in order to respect the difference with the governments, with the donors, but they are part of the decision. And it was really thanks to the CSO participation that when GASP was reformed, we were able to introduce this funding track that provide grants directly to producer organizations. I'm very happy to meet here Vivata, that was one of our partners in the last years. And this was really a big success. It was introduced like a pilot in 2016. And then when we discussed the reform, thanks to civil society push, this became like a structural feature of the GASP. So the GASP now provides grants to countries and to producers organizations and to private sector as well. But the one of organizations is really the best achievement that was thanks to civil society push. And the difference here is that, of course, it's not a perfect mechanism. POs have to collaborate with the UN entities, supervising entities or development banks. So they are not fully independent, let's say, in applying for the process, but the rationale is that they must be independent in deciding the projects, what they want to finance, what are their demands, and the approach, which is not to see the POs as recipients or beneficiary, but really as partners, and respect their role and their agency in developing and unfolding their potential. So this is just very quickly what we have learned, and we hope that will be strengthened by the next decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's a great example of what civil society advocacy can do. You know, and we get it right. I'm going to go finally to Sylvia. We were going to show a film, but we've had so much conversation that we probably won't have time. Sylvia, the first part of the sentence was about saving lives, and you know, at the moment, what is happening in Gaza, what is happening in Sudan, what is happening in Haiti. We had the Famine Compact agreed through the G7 in 2021. You know, if you could just reflect a little bit on the work that you are doing right now, what you think, if anything, could be delivered on the humanitarian side through the G7 and the G20 this year. Over to you.
Well, it's quite a broad request, and I'm not sure I have all the competencies to cover everything, because I'm working for Save the Children Italy and I'm covering humanitarian issues with a really small niche of the view that I can have on the global scale. But what I can see and what I can report in here is the different challenges that we are seeing on the ground in multiple locations, coming from, well, starting from the most visible ones. So starting from Gaza, that everyone is seeing every day on the media, we are seeing how different humanitarian principles are putting in constraint and are taking these principles are taken continuously in challenge in terms of how the different humanitarian organizations can work around and how we can really deliver in terms of supporting even the basics needs in there. If we are moving to what is happening in other locations, for example, you were mentioning Sudan, in there, what we have seen is that we have seen a spike in terms of the global visibility, the global attention on that, but then the entire international community has changed their lens in which they are framing and telling the story of what is happening in Sudan right now. So what we are seeing from the ground is some neglection in terms of funding, in terms of support, in terms of direct contribution to what is happening on the ground. And we are seeing how Sudan is one of the most large-scale displacement crises in the world right now, and is creating additional constraints in many of the neighboring countries in terms of how they are dealing with all of that without any support by the international community. And the G7 and G20 are two of the fora in which this kind of crises are to be the core and center, but we are not seeing the same kind of support or the same kind of discussion covering crises that are less perceived as closer to the geographically closer to the people who have the decision to be made. If we are moving then to Haiti, that is the last crisis that you were mentioning, in there what we have seen is that the international community is facing even more difficulties in trying to define what is happening in there. If you have no definition of the way in which the global sphere has to approach a specific crisis, it's even more challenging to understand how, what kind of support can be given to the communities in there. Well, my presentation in theory was presumed to introduce the film that we were about to see. We were presumed to see in this panel. So in theory, my presentation was to go on the El Nino phenomena and the impact of La Nina, El Nino phenomena, in particular in the Horn of Africa. But we have seen that this meteorological cyclical phenomenon has having impact in multiple crises, not only in the one that the video was presumed to be, so in the Horn of Africa, but we have seen similar consequences in terms of drought seasons alternated with rainy seasons and floods in multiple locations around the world. And it's something that we have seen is that the anticipatory action, the perception of something that is recurrent and is coming, and we can say that, and all the experts around the globe can say that these consequences are going to be happening soon in specific locations are not accompanied by anticipatory actions and are not financing in advance. So what we are seeing is that we are responding at the end when the crisis is already there. So it's not the way in which we think the international community must act. The way in which this kind of crisis we have and we can deal with that is with smart commitments in key global summits like the one in which we are talking in here and the one in which we are trying to influence, so both G7 and G20, but even in view of the next year Nutrition for Growth presidency that we was mentioning at the beginning, it is something that we can work together and try to work on the preventable aspects of the crisis more than the consequences, even continue to work on consequences. Obviously, we cannot forget what is happening on the ground, but given the children, given the communities, given the vulnerable people around the globe, the possibility to see their future in the right manner with their voice being heard in all the right places around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. I'm sorry to put you on the spot like that. We've got a few minutes for questions. Has anyone got any questions that they'd like to ask any of the panelists in particular? We didn't mention the Congo. No.
I haven't mentioned, but not because it's not important. It's because I was answering the question from Alice, so it's not on decision. I have not.
No, I just mentioned the three that are sadly the most in the headlines, which is, not really how we should see conflicts, but sadly we don't get enough attention on them. Let me just see if there's anyone got any questions. One thing I did just want to pick up, and there might be different people, is the financing. We have spoken about it a lot, but no one's actually said where the money's coming from. You've mentioned ODA aid. My own country's cut that already. Most countries are rolling back on it. Where do you think the money will come from? Debt relief. We also have the World Bank IDA replenishment at the end of this year, which is going to be really important. We're advocating around that. I wonder if anyone wanted to pick up on whether they're optimistic about unlocking the funding, whether we're doing enough on it as civil society. I don't know, Musa, you mentioned debt relief. Do you think that's ever going to happen? Or debt cancellation, sorry. Debt cancellation. Do you think it will happen this year? Yeah. Or anyone else. I'm just picking on you because you're right in front of me.
Not under this blame game. Yeah, I think all what is really happening right now is more like a blame game that the developing countries are not accountable, they're not transparent. I mean, I think basically just a blame game, and I don't see it happen that quick. Yeah.
Lucy, I know obviously a lot of the faith organisations, when we had the Jubilee campaign on debt, which had real success, do you see a kind of movement around that again? And it would be great just to pick up on how faith communities are organising around this year.
Thank you. We are in Italy, and Pope has mentioned that next year is an important year, and we'll be talking about Jubilee and debt relief. And the number of things that we are calling for, yes, we are calling for debt cancellation, and we're also calling for the rechanneling of special drawing rights. And this should be to help these African governments with liquidity so that they're able to spend in social sector spending, and of course, addressing these issues on food. If we are to look at our nationally determined contributions, and if we have to take into account the issues with food systems, we need financing for this. And it's part of what we will be pushing for. We've been talking about it in the IMF and the spring meetings, and we've been pushing for this. And we're also having the other dimension, because when you speak at the local community level, people want transparency and accountability on the utilization of these funds. So we want more mechanisms for civil society and also local communities to check if these funds that have been rechanneled, maybe from the SDRs, how do we monitor the utilization? Where did it go, and how did it translate to impact? And also ways to capture non-official data, like what is captured by civil society, and also what local communities are able to capture in terms of this financing. So there's a need for us to continue to push for that, especially ahead of the Jubilee year.
Great, thank you. And I know the One campaign's done some really good analysis of where money is going, and I think lots of African countries are spending 3 times as much as debt as they're able to on their human capital investments. I think we've got a question over there. I think you can just turn it, if you can just introduce yourself.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you so much. My name is Claudio Fernandez. I'm from Brazil, from an organization called Gestos. I'm also part of the Brazilian Civil Society Working Group for the 2030 Agenda, and I'm a co-facilitator of the Working Group 1 of the C20, which is Fair, Inclusive, and Anti-Racist Economies, as we titled in the G20. It's not much of a question, but it's a provocation, 3 points of provocation. One, you asked about where the finance is coming from. I would like to provoke on the tax issue. The G20 right now, it's very keen on producing an agreement on international taxation, which will be quite outstanding, but at the same time, making sure that the tax issues are discussed at the UN, which they are being discussed. Actually, last week, there was the first discussion of the tax convention at the UN. There's a lot of blockers, particularly the European Union, in a sense of bringing a little bit of what Stephen talked about, and that creates a complication. So the provocation is how to make the G7 countries actually admit and acknowledge that taxing large corporations, taxing the ultra-rich, taxing financial transaction taxes is a way to actually mobilize the resources necessary for finding a solution for the global food crisis. And the second provocation is about monoculture. Monoculture being agribusiness, and the fact that we have ultra-processed foods in the world that is creating a kind of a crisis of both malnutrition and obesity at the same time, which actually is tied up to 12 types of cancers, according to the World Health Organization. So these are what were called the leakages. I remember the ambassador from Zambia once at the FFD forum said about that. It's not a question of only bringing the money, but also stopping the leakages. The provocation is how to actually make these 8 or 9 mega transnational corporations that produce the ultra-processed foods that is being sold everywhere in the world actually pay their fair share and stop their pesticide-based production. Thank you.
I feel like we could have a whole panel discussion on both of those questions, but thank you, they're excellent points. And I think sometimes as a campaign, maybe we need to campaign on a big idea again, rather than the problems, and maybe pick one game changer and get behind that. We're running close to time, so I'm going to go around all the panelists just with the question I asked the first set of panelists, and if anyone wants to pick up on those points on tax and monoculture in that would be great. So if I go around this way, so the question was in 1 or 2 sentences, what is the number one thing you would like to see out of the G7 or G20 this year? What would success look like? Stephen, over to you. I know it's a hard question.
It's a hard question, but almost we have said it all.
Yeah.
In fact, it's to do the right policies, right actions to achieve what we target. You know, almost we have all said it all. Policies, stop hypocrisy, act rather than talk. That's it.
Thank you. Alberta?
If I may say, I think strengthening and maybe revising when it's needed, but strengthening what is already there without reinventing the wheel, promoting coordination, and recognizing the agency of those that work on food security in primaries, I mean, produce organizations, but also respect the priorities of governments and countries that need support on this.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Yeah, well, if I can give only one, to not repeat what is already said, I can say data-driven anticipatory action financing, just to avoid to act in advance of the emergencies and try to guarantee continuity.
Yes, to not repeat the financial part, the G7, G20 leaders recognize that children should put in central in policies, and also that we are failing with children under 5 years old with stunting and wasting, and over 5 years old with hunger, food insecurity, obesity, malnutrition, because of all this food that's not promoting healthy diets is causing disease. Thank you.
Lucy?
Our colleague here provoked us, and I've been duly provoked. I will call for an issue of tax, to look at tax justice and lessen the tax burden on the low income earners, and look at how to tax the high income earners so that we can channel funds towards food security.
Musa, is there anything else you wanted to add? I know you said at the, dignity of voice was your number one thing, but is there anything you wanted to say at the end?
Is to align, harmonize policy that promotes sustainable development and ensures that there is environmental friendly and also culturally acceptable diets. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to attempt to summarize a very rich discussion before we do a final thank you to the panelists. So I noted a kind of few things down. Number one, I think, is this convergence point. We need to avoid reinventing the wheel, bring together what really works, get rid of that which doesn't, but work together. The second, action, not words, and implementation. Doesn't matter what we say, it's what we actually do after all these summits and around them. The third, around breaking the silos. I think it's great we have the C7, the B7, the T7, etc. But how do we all work together rather than being in separate tracks? Because I think sometimes the governments like us in our own boxes rather than working together. The fourth is accountability. And again, we've had lots of commitments, there are lots of announcements all the time, but what are they really adding up to, and are they really delivering? And the fifth, and probably the most important, is that message that food is a right. This is about injustice. This is about inequality. It is not a technocratic discussion about solutions. It is about something that everybody has the right to, and we shouldn't feel ashamed of being bold and demanding that our leaders do more. So I'm going to finish there. We've got a few months to the G7 summit. At lunchtime tomorrow, a few of us are just getting together more on the campaigning side, putting our heads together. If you want to find us, look for me. I probably won't be wearing the same thing tomorrow, but hopefully you might recognize me. We also, the Hungry for Action campaign is open to anyone to join. We coordinate civil society organizations around the world. We're here to support civil society organizations. So just Google us online or find us or find me, and we can add you on that. So I think I just want to say a final thank you to all our panelists. It's been incredibly rich. And can we just give everyone a final round of applause? Thank you very much. You're all free. You're a very good speaker. It would be great to have you in the know.